From Air Canada's cabin crew strike to the ongoing Canada Post negotiations, labor disruptions have dominated much of the news this summer. And now on Labor Day, we take a look at how things are progressing when it comes to workers' rights. Economic Research Manager at Toronto Metropolitan University, Viet Vu, joins us now for the discussion. Viet, thanks for this.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I mentioned two notable labor strikes, but we're really seeing this across the country. More recently, 1,000 Dalhousie University Faculty Association and professional staff are on the picket line due to a lockout right now. In British Columbia, one of the province's biggest public sector unions could be going on strike after members voted overwhelmingly backed in job action. Are you noticing an uptick in labor disputes in the past few years, and why do you think that is?
I think what's really been interesting, especially this year, is that it's not just about labor dispute that has been in upticks. It's also really positive labor movements as well. So, as you said, there are job actions that are currently ongoing in BC, in Dalhousie. But then also last week, there was an entirely new union that was created in Victoria that, for the first time, potentially now cover Uber and gig drivers, which is a hugely positive thing. Not to add the fact that the trade tension with the United States has meant that a lot of unions that represent auto workers and steel workers, an example, have had to work very proactively with employers. And so, what I will say is that this year, in addition to all of the job disruptions, we have seen labor movements in general have a revival, if you will. I believe that the public support for union movement is the highest it has been since the 1980s, and there's a lot of excitement, I think, with labor movements around that fact.
Has this resulted in more rights for workers? Because you're saying there's a new union, but have any rights changed?
There has, in fact, been a lot of change over the past number of years when it comes to labor rights. Anything from workplace surveillance rights that has come in many different provinces where employers of a certain size have to publish different ways in which they are, in fact, monitoring their employment, to things like the right to disconnect and the right to have wages posted when job postings are being posted. And so I do believe that, especially since the pandemic, a lot of labor rights have in fact expanded for the vast swath of workers across the country, not just in manufacturing, but also in services as well.
Why do you think people are calling for more rights in their work?
It's an interesting thing, right? Because as we saw from the 80s, there has in fact been a decline in the level of labor support and the decline in number of people being unionized. What perhaps a lot of people felt during the pandemic and the ensuing economic disruption was this real sense that they're not getting the fair end of the bargain. Literally, in this case, a bargain. And so, in fact, young people are now supporting union in droves, and they realize that, oh, with all of these economics, technological, and societal disruption, labor union has been able to represent workers fairly so that people are not just paid well, but are working in the right conditions.
Okay, interesting. Now, what are the economic impacts of these strikes?
I think the whole idea of a strike being effective is that it is economically disruptive. We already saw from the summer, that just last month with Air Canada flight attendants striking, that it created massive amount of disruptions, not just in terms of flows of people, but also flows of goods. But the whole point of a labor strike is that it is economically disruptive because it is so costly that forces people to come back to the negotiating tables. And labor unions themselves know because it is disruptive that they only can actually organize a strike when it is absolutely necessary to do. At the same time, it is in fact a fundamental tenet of our labor rights, the right to strike. And so it only works because it is disruptive.
Well, on that note, it's been disruptive to the public, but how is public perception shifting around labor rights? Because we saw a lot with the Air Canada cabin crew strike that there was a lot of support from people who were delayed for flights or had flights canceled. A lot of them would talk to us and say that they were completely behind the cabin crew.
I think this is where that idea of how long a job action or labor action can sustain itself becomes really important because you actually see the contrasting narrative that was set around, let's say, the Air Canada strike, as you get mentioned, that enjoyed a massive amount of public support that allowed the union to even announced that they're defying a back to work order. You contrast that, let's say, with some of the job actions that are happening surrounding Canada Post workers that has been going on for almost a year now since the first disruption of Christmas last year. And in that case, that job action has drawn out, and public support for job actions for Canada Post unions have in fact been running thin. And this is why unions, in fact, have to be strategic. They obviously have the right to strike. They obviously have the right to fight for its workers. But all of these disruptions must also exist and be understood in terms of public support and public mandate for such a disruption.
And undoubtedly, there have been quite a few this year. So, back to my question, why do you think that's happening? Do you think it's partially because of what you mentioned? You know, a lot of these rights haven't changed since the 80s and 90s, and perhaps there's just a movement toward progression? Or, you know, is it the economic times? Are people feeling like they can't keep up and they want more from their employers?
I think it's a combination of two very specific things. The first thing is exactly as you mentioned, the economic uncertainty. Have a much heightened risk of a recession now, and especially in manufacturing sector that has been exposed by the trade war that Canada has currently with the United States. That means that many line members for these unions are looking for unions to be acting. So that economic uncertainty is the first major reason. The second reason is that unions are taking advantage and strategically using the fact that public support for unions and labor actions is the highest it has been. This is exactly the time when union can in fact push for their demands because they know that the public supports them. And so as far as they can push, they will push because it is strategically right for them to do so. And that is the second reason.
Okay, Viet, we appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
That's Toronto Metropolitan University Economic Research Manager, Viet Vu.